Here's the natural selection unit summative read aloud. You'll add your first name, last name, class period. I'm going to read these questions and the answers aloud. Please push pause if I'm going too fast. Number 1, a trait that makes it more likely that an individual will survive a specific environment. Options are non-adaptive, adaptive, variation, population. Number 2, the number of individuals with each trait in a population. Distribution, population, variation, generation. A group of individuals born and living at about the same time. Variation, population, generation, natural selection. Number 4, a specific characteristic of an individual organism. Trait, environment, natural selection, variation. Any difference in traits between individual organisms. Mutation, population, variation, distribution. A trait that makes it less likely that an individual will survive in a specific environment. Adaptive trait, non-adaptive, mutation, gene. A group of the same type of organism living in the same area. Generation, population, variation, protein molecule. The process by which the distribution of traits in a population changes over many generations. Natural selection, protein molecule, variation, mutation. 9. A type of large molecule that performs important functions inside organisms. Gene, mutation, protein molecule, trait. 10. An instruction for making a protein molecule. Adaptive trait, gene, non-adaptive trait, protein molecule. A random change to a gene that sometimes results in a new trait, protein molecule, gene, mutation. Which of the following best describes the traits within this population of beetles? There are 23 beetles in this population. This population of beetles has light and dark shells. These beetles are found in moderate climates. The average age of beetles in this population is 6 months. What statement best describes what happened to the thorn palm population over the last 100 years? So you have image to the left, year 2000, image to the right, year 2100. What happened to the thorn palm population over the last 100 years? The population stayed the same because the environment stayed the same. The traits within the population changed in response to the australope eating the thorn palms. New thorn palm seeds were brought into the environment by migrating australopes. The same individuals within the population grew older. Which statement best describes how the population of thorn palms changed over time? Again, left is 2000, on the right, 2100. Which statement best describes how the populations of thorn palms changed over time? The population of thorn palms with the adaptive trait decreased, and the population of thorn palms with the non-adaptive trait increased. Both the population of adaptive and non-adaptive thorn palms increased. The population of thorn palms with the adaptive trait increased, and the population of thorn palms with the non adaptive trait decreased. Both the population of adaptive and non adaptive thorn palms decreased. Based on the population below, what traits are most likely to show up in future populations? Select all the traits below that apply. A population with thorns, a population that is tall, a population with different amounts of water storage, or the trunk thickness, a population with no thorns. Which thorn palm traits would be best suited for the environment below? High water storage, they're tall, large thorns. High water storage, tall, small thorns. Low water storage, tall, large thorns. Or low water storage, tall, small thorns. 17. What is happening inside the eye to give it its unique color? The trait tells the cell to produce a specific gene that carries the color protein. The gene tells the cell to produce a specific protein that creates the color trait. The protein tells the cell to produce a specific trait that create the color gene. The gene tells the cell to produce a specific trait that creates the color protein. Which of the following is most likely the offspring for the parent shown in the diagram below? This is genetic inheritance of eye color. Parent 1 plus parent 2, color of the child's eye. Question mark. Green eye, blue eye, brown eye, gray eye. Watch this video, then answer the question below. The video above shows an example of two carnithons within the population of a cold environment. Which statement best explains what is happening to the population in their cold environment? All types of carnithons were able to reproduce and pass on their traits to their offspring. The carnithon with the non-adaptive trait survived and passed on their traits to their offspring, and the australope with the adaptive trait was not able to survive and pass on their traits to offspring. The carnithon with the adaptive trait survived and passed on their traits to their offspring, and the australope with the non-adaptive trait was not able to survive and pass on their traits to offspring. Random carnithons lived and random carnithons died, making the traits of the offspring random. 20. Why is the trait for camouflage level 10 not seen in graph 1, but you do see it in graph 2 and 3? So population 200 generations ago, this is graph 1, with their number of fish and camouflage. The environment has sharks. Population 50 generations ago, we have our number of fish, low to high camouflage, and the environment is no sharks. Lastly, graph 3 is the population today. Again, the number of fish and camouflage from low to high, and the environment is sharks. A mutation occurred in the genes of an individual that led to the formation of a new trait. A new type of fish moved into the area 50 generations ago. The fish decided to become more camouflaged to avoid the sharks. There is not enough information in the graphs to answer this question. 21. Why has the number of white moths decreased over time while the number of black moths have increased during that same period? This first picture is the pre-industrial revolution. The last picture is post-industrial revolution. Here is time in years from 0 to 10 and the population number of these moths from 0 to 700. So why has the number of white moths decreased over time while the number of black moths has increased during that same time? Is it because the environment became darker, causing the light color to become an adaptive trait? 2. The environment became darker, causing the dark color to become an adaptive trait. The environment became lighter, causing the light color to become an adaptive trait. The environment became lighter, causing the dark color to become an adaptive trait. 22. Hummingbirds can have different beak lengths. They use their beaks to reach the nectar, or their food, at the bottom of flowers. Hummingbirds with longer beaks can get food from long flowers. Hummingbirds with shorter beaks cannot reach the nectar in long flowers. If a hummingbird can't easily reach its food, it will die. The diagrams below show 3 possible hummingbird populations. Population 1, short. Population 2, short and long. Population 3, long. If their environment changes to only have long flowers, which of the following populations will most likely survive? Do you think it's only population 2 will survive because it's the only population with variation? Do you think it's all the populations will survive because the hummingbirds will change the length of their beaks if they need to? Is it populations 1 and 2 will survive? Or is it populations 2 and 3? 23. Northern foxes can have different fur colors. The foxes hunt squirrels for food. Foxes that have fur the same color as their environment are getting better at getting close to squirrels and catching them. The diagrams below show 3 possible fox populations. Population 1, brown. Population 2, brown, white. Population 3, only white. If their environment changes to have only brown dirt, which of the following fox populations will most likely survive? Population 1 and 2 will most likely survive. Populations 2 and 3 will most likely survive. Only population 2 will survive because it is the only population with variation. All the populations will survive because the foxes will change the color of their fur if they need to. 24. Eider ducks live in the ocean and have a layer of warm feathers underneath their regular feathers. They can have feathers of different thicknesses. These feathers help the ducks stay warm in cold water. Ducks with thicker feathers are more likely to stay warm and survive in cold water. But in warm water, thicker feathers can make the ducks overheat and die. The diagram below shows a population of ducks that live in an area of an ocean. At time 1, the population had the same number of ducks with thin and thick layers. At time 2, after many generations, there were many more ducks with a thin feather layer, and fewer ducks in the population with a thick feather layer. First box, population at time 1, thin, thick. After many generations, this box, population at time 2, thin, thick. How did the environment change between time 1 and time 2? Also, how did the population change? First choice, the water became warm. As a result, ducks with thin feathers were more likely to survive, so the ducks with thick feathers changed to have thin feathers. Next one, the water became warm. As a result, ducks with thin feathers were more likely to survive, so both kinds of ducks passed on the gene for the thin feathers to their offspring. The next one, the water became warm. With each generation, more ducks with thin feathers survived long enough to pass on the gene for thin feathers to their offspring. Last one. You cannot tell how the environment changed. With each generation, more ducks passed on the gene for feathers to their offspring. 25. Three squirrels can have different fur colors. Squirrels live in forests where foxes also live. Foxes hunt squirrels for food. Squirrels that have fur that is the same color as the trees are harder for the foxes to see and catch. The diagram below shows a population of squirrels that live in a forest. At time 1, the population had the same number of black and gray squirrels. At time 2, after many generations, there were many more black squirrels and fewer gray squirrels in the population. Box 1, population at time 1, black, gray. After many generations, population at time 2, black, gray. How did the environment change between time 1 and time 2? How did the population change? First choice, you cannot tell how the environment changed. With each generation, more squirrels passed on the gene for black fur to their offspring. Second choice, there were more black trees. Squirrels with black fur are more likely to survive, so the squirrels with gray fur changed to have black fur. There were more black trees. Squirrels with black fur are more likely to survive, so both types of squirrels passed on the gene for black fur to their offspring. There were more black trees. With each generation, more squirrels with black fur survived long enough to pass on the gene for black fur to their offspring. 26. Northern foxes can have different fur colors. The foxes hunt squirrels for food. Foxes that have fur the same color as their environment are better at getting closer to squirrels and catching them. A population of foxes once lived in an environment where there was not very much snow. The image shows that the population looked like then. The environment changed, so it is now very snowy. The diagrams below show two predictions for what the population could be like after many generations. Population before, environment, very little snow, with brown and gray. So here's prediction 1. Many generations later, brown, gray, white. Prediction 2. Many generations later, brown, gray. Which prediction best shows what the population could look like after many generations and what caused it to change? Is it prediction 1 is best? Two brown or gray foxes had a baby with a mutation in its genes for the white fur trait. Because white foxes are more likely to survive, that baby survived long enough to pass on its mutation, so the white fur trait became more common over generations. Prediction 1 is best, because white foxes are more likely to survive, so brown and gray foxes began to have an offspring with mutations in their genes for the white fur trait, so that their offspring would have a better chance of surviving. Prediction 2 is best. A fox could have been born with the mutation in its genes for the white fur trait and lived for a little while. Because white foxes are more likely to die, it would have been more likely to die before it had offspring. So the final population will only have brown and gray foxes. Prediction 2 is best. A fox could have been born with the mutation in its genes for the white fur trait, but having a mutation in its gene would have caused it to die when it was born. So the final population will only have brown and gray foxes. 27. Eider ducks live in the ocean and have a layer of warm feathers underneath their regular feathers. They can have their feathers medium feathers or thick feathers. These feathers help the duck stay warm in a cold environment. Ducks with thicker feathers are more likely to stay warm and survive in cold water. But in warm water, thicker feathers can make the ducks overheat and die. Population is medium and thick. Is it that no ducks could have been born with the thin feather trait because none of the adult ducks have the trait to pass down? No ducks could have been born with the thin feather trait in the past, but some with that trait could be born in the future if the environment changes to be warmer. A duck could have been born with a mutation in its genes for thin feather trait and lived for a little while, but it would have been more likely to die before it had offspring. A duck could have been born with a mutation in its genes for the thin feather trait, but having a mutation in its genes would have caused it to die when it was born. Scientists measured the beak length of a population of birds in a lake in 1960. They measured the beak length of the bird population again in 2010. What do the graphs show you about the variation in beak lengths of the birds by the lake? Here's one graph, 1960, number of birds, beak length, short to long. And another graph at 2010, number of birds, beak length, short to long. Again, what do the graphs show you about the variation in the beak lengths of the birds by the lake? There was the same amount of variation in 1960 and in 2010. These bar graphs do not show the amount of variation in the population. There was more variation in 2010. There was more variation in 1960. 29. Scientists measured the height of giraffes in two populations, one in the wild and one in a nature preserve. Which statement best describes the difference between the two populations? First graph is giraffes in the wild. So we have the number of giraffes and their height from short to tall. Here we have giraffes in the nature preserve, the number of giraffes and their height from short to tall. Again, which statement best describes the difference between the two populations? There is more variation in height of the giraffes found in the wild. There is more variation in height of the giraffes found in the nature preserve. The giraffes in the wild are mostly shorter than the giraffes found in the nature preserve. The giraffes in the wild are mostly taller than the giraffes found in the nature preserve.